Hey guys, it's me, Miss Adams. I just want to start off our lecture with the weekly agenda, right? Today we're at Tuesday, the 28th, and we can come in and see that we've got a warm up that we need to do. If you haven't done the weekly participation, make sure you do that. And then right now we're going to come in here and we're going to look at the Totalitarianism in Russia lecture. I already did a video on how to make sure that you're downloading it into your OneNote, so you can take the same annotations as I am or just follow along. And then I've got the link for the PowerPoint right here. And right now I am doing the online lecture video. So what I'm going to do is open up my OneNote, and I've got the lecture that we all downloaded hopefully earlier today. And so I want to start off by just going over totalitarianism, right? That word, we keep seeing it over and over and over again. I hope that's a very explicit hint that you need to make sure you're reviewing it for your quiz and your test next week. So totalitarianism, I've got the word total boxed off or highlighted or annotated, right? And it's just to remind me that totalitarianism is when you have total control over people's private and public life. And then I've just got the different forms of the word written out right next to it. As you guys can see, you've got totalitarian is a noun that you can use to describe a person, or the type of government that we're talking about. And then you have the word totalitarianism, which is a description of an action, a government. And so this lecture is going to go over both the aspects of totalitarianism as we've seen them so far, and then as well as what Stalin is doing in Russia. So let me introduce you to the love of my life, Joseph Stalin. Now, I do want to let you know that his birth name is Josip, but we have anglicized it, right? Made it more English looking by calling him Joseph Bessarionas Jez Jugasvili. And so he takes the name Stalin, Man of Steel, as his nickname, as his pen name. And so here you get to see a portrait of him as he's older, very distinguished looking in his military uniform. And you guys will notice that most dictators in history, when they go out in public, they're actually in a military uniform, and that also kind of shows off strength. Now, I do always enjoy showing the young Joseph Stalin because this is why I love him. This is why there's that poster of him up in my room with me and him holding hands. He's super good looking as a young man. I'm a sucker for that facial hair. And as you guys will learn as we go through this lecture, the most important thing is he has terrific follow through. If he says he's going to do something, he does it. And if he says he's going to put you in the gulag and work you to death, well, of course he's going to. Now, really quickly, before we get into other aspects of Soviet Russia, I just want to cover some other fun facts about the love of my life. His father was an abusive alcoholic. His nickname growing up was Soso. He was 5'5" at his tallest height. He had a scarred face from smallpox that he survived as a child. He walked with a limp before it was cool, but it was actually from a carriage accident where he survived as a kid, like we all have. One arm was shorter than the other. He was born in the nation of Georgia, not the state. And when he grew up, he thought he was going to be a priest. And so his mother actually sent him to seminary school. Now, there are a lot of really cool, fun, easy podcasts. And there is one on Joseph Stalin in the unit resources. If you guys, want to listen to something while you walk around the block or just lie on the couch and are sick of TV. But so that's a little bit about our dictator as a human being, and obviously why he's every girl's dream. So this slide is just 100% review right? We've got our 7 aspects of totalitarianism. You've got dynamic leader, modern technology, single party dictatorship, ideology, state control of society, of the individual, and then methods of enforcement. So I do want to make sure that you know I keep bringing this up for a reason. So hint, hint, hint. I like this cartoon. I don't know if you guys can see it very well. I'm putting you on the list of terrorism suspects to be investigated. And she's just standing there with a Peace Now sign. Why are you doing that? Okay. And so he's saying the president said, if you're not with us, you're with the terrorists. And so she's like, but that's not true, because she's asking for peace. And he's like, yeah, there it is. See, there you are. And so right here, she's like, I'm going to fight this. And he's saying, I'll put you down as an enemy combatant. And so I just really like this cartoon because it really shows black and white thinking in a totalitarian state where you have to alienate people who aren't with you. It's very much about us versus them mentality. And that's just super sad because life is full of grays. It's hard to go through life with black or white thinking. That's one of my really funny, cute cartoons. So just to go over and review methods of enforcement, this is all hopefully review for us. The state or the government uses terror and violence to force obedience and to crush the opposition. So we've got the police spy on citizens and intimidate them, and they do this in all societies. So far what we've covered are the Cheka in Russia. We talked about the black shirts, the precursor to the OVRA in Italy. When we get to World War II, we will be talking about the Gestapo that are going to work for Adolf Hitler. And then I just wanted to emphasize that even here in the United States, we use totalitarian means to keep the public either safe or safe from itself, or to keep doing what the government wants. And so we have the CIA, the FBI, I put down narcs just for fun, but we have undercover police officers, and we've got spies as well. So even if we are a quote unquote great nation and we too have democracy, we also have these aspects. So don't think that totalitarian automatically equals only bad countries. So as we come here, just to some pictures, I have just some pictures of the Cheka, a famous book that was written about the Cheka in Russia, a picture that I've possibly already shown you in the Mussolini lecture with Mussolini in his black shirts as they march on Rome before he becomes prime minister. And then over here, just to preview Adolf Hitler and his SS and his Gestapo or Schutzstaffel, but his secret police as well. Pardon the German, I know it's terrible. In all totalitarian nations or in all countries, indoctrination is vital. So when we're looking at what is indoctrination, it's instruction in a certain belief. And so in this case, it's instruction in the government's beliefs. Now, your textbook doesn't use this word more than once. The word is commissar, and it basically is a teacher of communists' beliefs. And one of the famous commissars in Soviet Russia is going to be your vocabulary word, Leon Trotsky. He's actually one of the head commissars of all of the Soviet Union. And so his job is making sure that teachers are teaching correctly, that the people in Russia are learning all of the communists' beliefs as Lenin wants them to be taught. So basically, indoctrination is when someone's trying to teach you to believe something and to have very specifically a certain opinion, right? Even if that opinion is fact, you can still choose whether or not you want to believe that fact, like flat earthers. It's a fact that the earth is round, and yet there are flat earthers. So when we're looking at indoctrination, I do want to make sure that you guys understand that the whole point of my job as your teacher is to indoctrinate you into wanting to be a good citizen that is informed and participates in society. That's what my underlying job is, right? But when we're looking at indoctrination and communicating beliefs, it's easier because you guys have hopefully one trusted teacher that you look up to and you admire. And you see us every single day. And if there's one adult that you have a good relationship with and you believe in what they believe in, it makes it just a little bit easier to have all people conform that have come out of schools. So when we're looking at indoctrination, this covers both state control of the society because the school is allowed to exist and the framework is given by the government, but it's also state control of the individual because we are teaching you how to speak at home, what to think when you're not around other people, and how to behave. So this reinforces the ideology or the belief system of the state or the government. And then I really want, and I'm really sad that we're not in class for this, but I really want you guys to think about who dictates what you learn. Miss Adams is not the person who comes up with the curriculum. I do what I'm told. So first and foremost, we have the United States or the Federal Department of Education headed by Betsy DeVos. She exists and makes certain rules and mandates that every 50 states has to follow. Now, we also have national standards that we have to follow, right? That's Common Core. That's that stuff that you guys like in your math classes so much where you have to write out the explanation of why 9 times 6 is 42 and how you got that. Now, each and every state also tells us what we have to teach. California Department of Education tells me through World History Curriculum Standards what I have to teach. And then it even comes down to the county level. We have a county department, Department of Education, and they also have rules that we have to follow. And so I thought it would be fun to introduce the idea. There's always a big fight in education. Who's allowed to tell you what we're supposed to be teaching? And in certain states, it's a really big fight. Are we allowed to teach creationism, which is the belief that God created the world in 7 days, or 6 days, and then on the seventh day he rested? Or in some states, you can only teach evolution. But that's another huge fight. And then another fight is what's appropriate to be taught in sex ed. Is that the place for schools to teach children about sexual health and sexual behaviors, or is that something that's responsible only to parents and the family? So if the school is teaching you something, it's because the law mandates it. And is there a motive we have for teaching you that? And so I just want to leave you with some of you will find that your parents' views and what you're taught in the home sometimes conflicts with what the school is teaching you. I hope you don't feel that way in my class, but I know I'm definitely guilty too, where some teachers make it very clear if they're Democrats or Republicans, and then espouse their public views or what they personally believe in the classroom, and that's something that's not supposed to be happening. But when that does happen, does it conflict with what you're being taught at home? Another really interesting conversation that was around for a long time was, is it okay to stand for the pledge, or what does kneeling mean if you're kneeling for the pledge? That was another big, controversy as well. So indoctrinating you guys into believing what we want or what the government wants. Okay. So here I've just got these super cute visuals of what indoctrination means. And so here we've got the literal brainwashing, right? And so here's the teacher or the commissar, and they're brainwashing the adults. And then over here, you've just got, indoctrination of this young student with the American flag behind her and a ruler. And I wanted to prompt you guys to think about it. Do you have to wait to be told to stand for the pledge, or do you just automatically do it? Do you guys automatically put your hand on your heart, or do you only do it because someone tells you to do it? these are all signs that you have been indoctrinated in everyday life, whether it's good or it's bad. It is, right? And then in totalitarian states, not only do they rely on brainwashing, they rely heavily on propaganda. So we know that propaganda is biased or incomplete information using to sway us to believe a certain thing. And then on top of it, when we're looking at censorship, censorship is the restriction of access to information or to be able to express yourself, right? So when we talk about Soviet Union Russia, nothing existed without the permission of the state. And that's going to be the same as in fascist Germany under Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. But that was also true in the United States in the 1940s and 50s, in the film industry, and the 60s. So this is something that's not uncommon. And we've already kind of talked about censorship a little bit in the arts. We've talked about the Enlightenment thinker in France, Voltaire, who had to use a fake name. And he wrote books to criticize the church and the government instead of flat out saying, I hate the Catholic Church. They're hypocrites. He would write stories about people who are victims of the hypocrisy of their church. And then if you are going to question the information that's being presented to you or ask for more, it could be treasonous and you could be put to death. And then I thought, for fun, if you guys were really super bored, I've started reading a lot of books. Just Google banned books and see books that have been forbidden to be taught in schools or being allowed in nations. And look at why. It's actually kind of funny. And then I just put down this note for The Handmaid's Tale. I don't know if you guys have watched it. I believe it's on Hulu. It is adult, so definitely make sure your parents know that you ask their permission. But inside A Handmaid's Tale, you get to see this use of totalitarianism and those 7 aspects as well. Here, I've just got some fun Russian propaganda. You've got this mean-looking woman being very stern, and she's saying, translation, keep your mouth shut. But here in the United States, excuse me, we had a saying in World War I, loose lips sink ships. And of course I spelled sink wrong. My bad. I've been around the computer way too long. Loose lips sink ships. Here in the middle, you've got he who does not work does not eat. And that was one of the criticisms of communism, right? If you don't have a boss or a government telling you what to do, who's just going to get super lazy. And so here you have a hammer, and then over here you've got the spoon. And then the last one I thought was really super cute. Knowledge will break the chains of slavery. So what is really cool is that the Soviet Union and other communist nations are huge, big proponents of education. There's just a little bit of bias, but they really did want to emphasize education so that the nation could move forward faster than other capitalist nations. I definitely enjoyed this propaganda piece, away with private peasants. And then this is against one of your vocabulary words called kulaks. And we're going to talk about them a little bit later. They're wealthy farmers, very specifically wealthy farmers. And they are in Ukraine, and they revolt unsuccessfully against Joseph Stalin. So, but here we've got the private peasants are the most bestial, brutal, savage exploiters who, in the history of other countries, have time and time again restored the power of landlords, czars, priests, and capitalists. And so this was very, very clearly a campaign, a national campaign to justify killing the kulaks. We're going to talk about that in another slide about the Terror Famine. But I just really, really enjoy this visual of this arm punching this guy in the back. So, yeah. And then here's, I think, the last one, where it looks like a super cute Soviet family. You've got a dad, possibly an older daughter and a son, or maybe a really young wife, no judgment. But they all look like they're all loyal to the idea of equality, or being equally poor anyway, and a classless society. And the translation here from Russian into English is "We'll raise a generation selflessly loyal to communism." Okay. Um, and so all that propaganda gets to sway you to believe one way or the other what you think about the communist nation and the communist state. So then here we've got religious and ethnic persecution. So what we've got going on is defining the word ethnicity. And I just want to remind you that ethnicity, we can say you're Latino, Latina, Latinx, African American, Slavic, Germanic, Caucasian. It's not your nationality, which could be American or anything American, but it's kind of relating to your race. And so underneath a totalitarian government, you're going to have the need to find an enemy, and this goes along with dynamic leadership, right? Or the dynamic leader and uniting your country against an enemy. And so it's usually really easy to unite them against an ethnic group or a religious group because they're small groups of people. And so I just want to highlight for thousands of years, Jews have been persecuted, whether it is by the Egyptians or the Assyrians, or today in, Iranian politics or in, the world. But I just wanted to share the information with you guys that in the United States, out of 30 million people, only 7.5 million of them are Jews, which represents a total 2% of the population in the United States. Now, that might shock you because here in LA, we probably have a considerably large amount of people who are Jewish because we're in a more liberal city in a liberal area. But if you go to smaller towns in the middle of nowhere, they probably maybe have like one Jewish family. And the same thing goes for Muslims. In the United States, we only have 3.5 million Muslims, which represents just under 1% of the United States population. But here in here in Los Angeles, we probably are like, really, it doesn't feel like it's that few. But it's easy to pick on a small group of people. And if these people are living in small towns in the United States, it's easier to pick on them because there are fewer Jews and Muslims there. And people won't stand up for people who are different, kind of like taking candy from a baby, except not as fun or as tasty. Okay. Now, some examples in history that we've already looked at where we pick on a small population is the Armenian population in the Ottoman Empire in 1914, where we have the beginning of the Armenian genocide, where over 50% of the Armenian population in the world was murdered. We're going to talk a little bit later today about the Ukrainians that Stalin murders. He murders about 80% of the Ukrainian population. And then I just feel like I always want to mention Jews. The Jewish people are going to be persecuted not only in Germany and in Europe, but in Russia. They've been persecuted against as well for about 1,000 years. They were picked on so consistently that there is a word in the Russian language, pogrom, that literally means an organized massacre of Jews. So I just want to emphasize how important this is in historical context. And what we're going to, keep on talking about is picking on, or just anti-Semitism in general. And so over here, I've got some really, interesting visuals or hopefully cute visuals where it's easy to pick on a black sheep because those are people who literally stand out, and it's easy to isolate people based on something that you can see. But I do want to let you guys know that people who are practicing Judaism or being Jewish is not a race. They look like, us, like human beings, like people. And so when you're trying to push out a minority that looks like you have to make them stand out somehow. And so Adolf Hitler does that by making all of the people who are Jewish in Germany and Austria wear Stars of David on their clothing so that you can identify who they are. Over here is this cute little cartoon, and you've got Native Americans, and here you can see it's Plymouth Rock. They say they're building a wall because too many of us enter illegally, and we won't learn their language or assimilate to their culture. And you can see here that these are the pilgrims, right? The pilgrims that land in Plymouth Rock. And so over here, I just got like the ironic, funny cartoon. And this cartoon came out a couple of years ago because it was a commentary on the building the United States border wall with Mexico, right? It's the same argument we use with some illegal immigration in political spheres, right? So what we've got over here is a little bit, or starting to be a little bit more specific to Joseph Stalin and the horrible, terrible things that he does in Russia. So he does create a police state. So we know that Lenin started the Cheka, and the Tsar had a version of secret police before that, so it wasn't new. But there were informants everywhere. They would monitor your telephone lines. They would read your mail. I know that this is kind of a weird concept, but they would open your mail and just read it. It's crazy. It's kind of like how your parents have a tracking app on your phone where they can read all of your text messages, except it's not just your parents reading it, it's complete strangers. So I've got here that children rat out their parents. And so, yeah, this is what happens when you put kids in youth groups and in schools, these governmental controls over society or state control of society. And they teach them that it's important to snitch even on family members because we are only as strong as our weakest link. And now a movie that I know I need to see, and I'm suggesting to you guys, as long as your parents are okay with it, is going to be Jojo Rabbit. And it was one of the great movies from last year where a little boy has an imaginary friend, Hitler, and he's trying to decide, does he, follow what he's being taught in the youth groups in Hitler Youth, or is he going to follow what his parents are teaching him? And his parents put him in a youth group so that way he could look and be involved, look like everyone else and be involved like everyone else, so they wouldn't suspect them for having different ideas. And so anyone who's arrested is going to be executed as a traitor. And then just like in the Reign of Terror during the French Revolution, right, there aren't going to be real trials. You're just executed. Now, one really important thing during Joseph Stalin's time is a time period called the Great Purge. And that's going to happen between 1934 and 1938. And the only reason why I want you guys to keep in mind those dates is it's because it's right before World War II. During this 4 or 5 year period, Joseph Stalin murders anywhere between 8 to 13 million people. Now, he may not have directly murdered them. He might have sent, and he did send some of them to gulags. Gulags is one of your vocabulary words. It's a labor camp where you're worked to death. And Stalin sent a lot of people there. It didn't matter. You could have been sent there for being a priest. You could have been sent there for being Jewish. You could have been sent there, as you guys watch your documentary on Friday. I'm really excited. One of the guys talks about being sent to the gulag for stealing a sack of potatoes. Or anyone who is threatening his power. And what makes this one super, super important is he's going to kill a ton of military leadership and troops all right before Hitler is about to start World War II. So this makes Soviet Union Russia under Stalin very, very vulnerable. And that's kind of keep that in your back pocket as we move forward for World War II. Now, what makes me absolutely love Stalin is his phrase was "no man, no problem." And if that's familiar to you, then you would be absolutely correct. That was on the bottom of the poster in my classroom behind my desk. And as you guys can see here, is I'm highlighting a picture, or the picture of the man right there, and then he's gone. So if there is no man, whatever problem he had or he reported to you, it's gone. And so records of you would be deleted. And there's, if you guys have time, a really good book called 1984 by George Orwell. That's a little bit thicker of a book with like 150 pages. Or you could read Animal Farm if you haven't been assigned it already by your teacher. That's a little bit less than 100 pages. But both of these books were written in criticism of Joseph Stalin and totalitarian policies. And then over here, this propaganda poster always makes me think of Disney for some reason. But here is some of that vocabulary. The proletariat must violently destroy those who have enslaved him. So number one is the kulak. This right here is going to be number one, this fat, wealthy farmer right here. And then you've got number two is the priest. So you have to kill those who have fooled you. Three down here is going to be the bourgeoisie, those who have owned and prospered from your labor. And then at the bottom, who's already dead, obviously Tsar Nicholas II and the royal family or the government, because communism is really about the community, or like some of you guys put in your answers last week, the people. The people are supposed to be in charge. Now, under Joseph Stalin, when we're looking at modern technology in terms of propaganda, he would control all newspapers, movies, anything that went on the radio. Same thing with Mussolini. But what's different is he started something called Soviet realism. And Soviet realism is a real life art form. And I've got a lecture on it in case those of you who are interested in art or music and literature are really interested in it. But Stalin forces all of the authors, composers, everyone has to portray only the positive aspects of communism, or else they are censored. And that is a diplomatic way for saying they got sent to the gulag and were worked to death. Now, when we're also looking at his totalitarian state, education becomes super important. Education is controlled all the way from your free nursery school, so like daycare when you were 1 or 2 years old, all the way through university, whether that's a bachelor's degree or a PhD. If a student or a teacher spoke out against the government, they would be imprisoned because you're a weak link. You need to go. My favorite youth groups, right? They're used to indoctrinate young people. So a shameless plug for Jojo Rabbit once again. And it stresses, and education stresses the importance of self-sacrifice. And this is just to remind you, right? The whole point of communism is it's about the good for your community. If you guys know or have friends who have families who are from different parts of the world, self-sacrifice is actually a really important concept in many cultures. One thing is, if you know someone who is in arranged marriage, they get married and stay married even if they're miserable, because they know they'll have the support of their family moving forward. It was a match based on either strength or some sort of a family connection. There was a purpose behind it. And you will marry this other person that you don't love or know because it's for the good of your family. It's for the good of your city, for the good of your community. Another aspect of self-sacrifice, I don't know if you guys saw pictures, but before the United States went down on safer at home quarantine, there were pictures of the people of Wuhan walling themselves in to their city to protect the rest of the nation. And that's the definition of self-sacrifice. And so here I just have some Soviet realism paintings for you. One, I just want you guys to all make sure you know and love Papa Joe. Papa Joe is a nice guy. He wears white suits, which make him look very honorable, like he would never tell a lie. And you know what? Kids love him. They buy him flowers to show him how much he is loved. Down here in the bottom left, you've got this really happy young lady who's in a field of wheat. And isn't it lovely to work in the fields as a young girl? You've got your school books with you. You just look so liberated and fun in the sun. And then down here in the bottom right, isn't it beautiful to work on a farm with everyone? You've got all these bright colors and the sun. You've got all of this community. And this is what Soviet realism was. Even if it wasn't true, that's what they said had to be true. And so what we also have is seizing control of the economy, or state control of the economy. Just to review, Russia was way less industrialized than any other of the nations, but you guys should already know that from our World War I unit. Okay. And so Stalin's going to create something called a command economy. Now, he doesn't make up that word or that phrase, he just does it, right? And command economy is one of your vocabulary words, is when a government takes control and makes economic decisions. So just like Lenin's war communism, or the NEP, right, the new economic plan that Lenin had to set in place to allow capitalist ventures to help save Russia from going bankrupt. And so Stalin wants to make sure he's going to introduce his own type of command economy with the 5-year plans, because he wants Russia to advance themselves so much that they're going to be equal to or better than capitalist nations. Super important. So he comes out with 5-year plans, and there are many of them. It's not like it's one plan for 5 years and another plan. It's like, oh, we're going to have a 5-year plan for steel production, a 5-year plan for coal production, a 5-year plan for oil. So like each aspect of the economy has its 5-year plan. And then when that one ends, another one is going to begin, because you can always be better and always do better. The goals that are set are always unrealistic, and many people at the plant lie about how much they are making. And what this comes down to is, would you like to be sent to the gulag, right? Our new favorite labor camp to die in, for not doing what Papa Joe asked you very nicely to do? Or would you rather go in a few years when your fib is found out, because they're going back and verifying the records? So do you want to die now, or do you want to die later? And so you'll find that a lot of data, obviously that's what you guys are looking at right now, is data from Soviet era industrial production. It's a lie. But at the same time, because they are trying to make all of these production quotas, there's shortages in things that they actually need, like food that's going to lead to famine, shortage in housing, shortage in clothing. There's just a shortage in everything. And so, it's good, because Russia does absolutely increase, and they do make tremendous gains. But everyone's so afraid of the leader that they're not honest. And so just got some visuals over here of industrial Russia propaganda, and why it's important to build your modern nation, build your city up, make sure we're all working together. And just so that you know, Stalin brings you all of these new, great, amazing things. Papa Joe, right? So he also seizes control of the economy by seizing or taking private property. All private property, especially farms, as you guys are going to read in the textbook, is going to become government property. And this is what I talked about earlier, is there's a group of people called kulaks. Kulaks are wealthy Russian, and honestly, I would just say Ukrainian. Let's keep it nice and simple. And so the Ukrainian people are from Ukraine, right? And so these kulaks are forced onto collective farms. Now, you guys have seen this version of the word 3 different ways. We can just call them collectives, or we describe it as collectivization. But the easier expression is collective farms. And this is where hundreds of families are forced to produce food for the nation and not themselves. Collective because they're working collectively together on farms that don't belong to them. And so the kulaks in Ukraine got really upset and they're like, you know what? We're tired of having all of our food stolen for us. We're being left with almost nothing. We can barely feed ourselves. So what they do, they kill their animals. They don't just waste their seeds, they also set fire to all of the extra food and grain so that the government can take it. It's usually taken into the cities to feed the people in the cities, or during a time of war, it's used to feed the army as well. And Stalin is like, cool. We're going to take everything that you have left over and we're going to leave you to starve to death. And so this led to a terrible intentional famine that we call the Terror Famine. And this is where approximately 5 to 8 million people die because Joseph Stalin wanted it to. So if these people aren't sent to the gulag for being active disruptors of the food chain the food chain supply, they were left to passively die in their homes without any food. And so this is me just highlighting that when Joseph Stalin says he wants something, he's going to get it. And that's, it's a sign of a very strong man who knows what he wants. I hope you guys can sense the sarcasm and jokingness in my voice. And so over here, I just have another Soviet realism painting where it shows you that collective farming is cool. You get to hang out all day on the farm with your friends. But I also have a newspaper article here where they talk about the deliberate starvation of peasants. And that's obviously not going to be shared in Soviet Union, and it's in English. It's either an American or British newspaper. Okay. So a little bit more positive in terms of communism and the love of my life, Joseph Stalin. He gave women more rights, so that's great. Women are now able to divorce their husbands. Super excellent. Education is now available for both men and women of all social classes. You don't have to be wealthy to go to college anymore. And this is a really big deal in the 1930s and 40s when that was not the case in the United States. And a lot of women in Soviet Union are encouraged to go into medicine and not become nurses, by the way, but become female doctors or to become scientists. That was super rare in the United States. I know that my mother is one of few dentists that went to school in the 1970s. And I have a girlfriend whose grandmother was a female doctor in the 1950s and 60s, and she was like the only one. So counter that to Soviet Russia, where they were doing it way before we did. And so there were a lot more opportunities for women to work. But just like Mussolini, and eventually when we get to Hitler, motherhood is the most patriotic thing that you could do. And you need to produce future generations to help in our struggle. So Russian women were just doing it first. They went to work all day and they came home and they took care of the kids. So make sure you thank your mom after listening to this, or your dad, or both. They work more than 40 hours a week and still come home with the energy to help you with your homework, and take care of the house and cook you dinner and walk the dog and all of that stuff. So over here, we've got just really cute little propaganda posters where you've got a young woman right here helping up an elderly woman who's been kept down by just being a woman in the house all the day long. So women can help raise Russia up. Here I've got a very severe looking Russian Rosie the Riveter, and you can work too, or yes, we can. And then I just like this one because this is such a cute little girl just being so excited to be in school and torment boys. But so here you've got women have a better life in Soviet Russia. And then here you have the checking for understanding, these 9 questions. If you can't answer these, then you definitely need to make sure you go back and either listen to this again or you read the lecture again, possibly read the textbook, which you should be doing anyway, but make sure you guys can answer these before moving forward. And then I did this in the Italian lecture, and I actually really liked it, just making sure that I hit all of the vocabulary words that you guys are going to be taking a quiz on. So I pretty much have beaten totalitarian state to death. We talked about the media and censorship and newspapers, propaganda. I showed you a lot of pictures, collectivization and farming on collective farms I went over. Definitely talks about communism. We've talked about famine or starving to death. I did briefly mention the new economic policy, but I do know that there's more information in your textbook. Go back in there. The full word, right, for USSR is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. But when you read the textbook, it's also lovingly referred to as the Soviet Union, but it's just the new name for Russia, and that happens in 1922. The Politburo is the one thing that I actually didn't mention, and I want you to just think of this as basically the new lawmaking body of Russia. It's just the communist version. Lawmaking, oops. Sorry about that, guys. This is why I do all the annotations first. So you've got the lawmaking body within Russia, but it's just full of those communists and the Soviets, like the Congress of Soviets. So it's just kind of like the head in Moscow. Leon Trotsky, I didn't mention in this, but I do. Oh, I did. He was the Commissar, but I just want to make sure that I make this clear. He is the enemy of Joseph Stalin. He's talked about in the textbook a little bit more. Because he's kind of an important enemy. Joseph Stalin, I hope you guys learned something about Joseph there. I'm pretty sure I covered the 5-year plans kind of decently, and the Terror Famine, and, a gulag, excellent, and the Great Purge, and the command economy. So I feel pretty good about this lecture, and hopefully you guys know that if I went too fast, this is recorded for a reason. You guys can go back through and listen to me talk about something, or you're always welcome to meet me on Canvas conferences if you've got any questions for me. So I'm going to end on this note, and I miss you guys, and I hope to see and talk to you guys very soon. Bye.